It's 1940, and Europe has become a graveyard. The powerful Bf-109 and FW-190 ruled the sky, Britain is about to fall, and German brutality is spreading rapidly. Yet somewhere in Britain, a new kind of aircraft is being tested, one that isn't another brute, but an act of pure defiance. A sleek, silver ghost designed to break every rule, leaving nothing but shattered myths in its wake. But how did the P-51 Mustang break almost every rule of aerial combat? The P-51 Mustang was not a conventional weapon. It was a bold experiment, a beautiful mistake, and a machine built on a principle of rebellion.
And on the shipping targets, freighters, fishermen, trawlers, harbor and coastal craft, destroyer or lugger, it's the same enemy.
When the British entered the war, they relied heavily on the P-47 Thunderbolt and P-38 Lightning for escort missions, yet their lack of range left many British bombers exposed when pulling off raids deep in Germany. So, when the P-51 Mustang finally arrived, it was different. It took the best of every fighter and interceptor, packaged it into a sleek design that was reliable and fast. Its laminar flow wing and massive internal fuel tanks solved the range problem, something unseen in the war at the time, and when it was combined with the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, it gained the speed and altitude to go toe-to-toe with German fighters while keeping its range.
Air and on the ground instead of waiting for him. And above all, to follow him to his destruction.
The P-51 didn't just save the British, it gave them the ability to send bombers deep into German territory, while safely making it back home and rendering the Luftwaffe completely useless. Instead of waiting for British escorts to turn around, German pilots were now being hunted in their own country, having to face the reality of either being shot down or losing their factories to the massive bombing raids of the Allies. This was something no one in the war had ever seen, and the Germans simply couldn't understand how a single American-built fighter had the ability to destroy everything it threw at them. But how did the United States once again pull off the unthinkable? When the Second World War began, the rule was simple. Bombers carried heavy loads of ordnance, powerful enough to wipe out cities, yet they were incredibly slow. Interceptors were fast, but had limited range, and dogfighters were agile, with optimized engines that excelled at low altitude. There was a clear distinction between, and they were used for their designated purpose. But the British needed something, and they needed it fast, so the British Purchasing Commission turned to North American aviation in April 1940, asking for nothing more than the P-40, which the British wanted the Americans to build under license, yet this was quite a big request. Chief Designed and North American Aviation President James H. Dutch Kindleberger had a different idea, something that caught the British off guard when he said, "We can build a better fighter than the P-40, and we can do it faster than it would take us to set up a production line for the P-40. The claim was audacious. No one believed him, but desperate, the British gave the green light. A contract was signed, designated NA-73, and the deadline? Well, they were only given 120 days to come up with something spectacular. American engineers quickly went to work, but building another stretched and streamlined version of the P-40 wasn't going to cut it. The project had to be radically rethought. Yet, knowing the limitations of existing designs, North American aviation knew that another conventional fighter with a bulky engine and thick wing wasn't going to cut it. They had to build something different, something that had never been seen or ever thought of, yet as revolutionary as the modern F-22 Raptor. And that is where they began breaking the rules. The first rule to be changed was simple. The wing had to be different. They knew that most fighter wings were thick and clunky, providing a good lift-to-drag ratio when flying at lower speeds. Yet this wasn't going to cut it, so it was completely revamped. The Mustang's wing had a laminar flow airfoil, which at the time was still being perfected by the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics. The design completely revolutionized the battlefield, allowing for air to smoothly flow over the wing for a much longer distance until turbulence began. In simple terms, it meant that the aircraft had a lot less drag. And what does less drag mean in the world of aerodynamics? Speed. But this wasn't just any speed. It was a massive 440 miles per hour, 10% faster than the Spitfire could reach at that time, and considered unprecedented with its Allison V1710 engine. Yet the British later fitted their own Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, which was proven to be more effective at high altitude. Now, with one of the fastest aircraft of the war, the American designers were just getting started. choosing to make another extremely bold choice: adding more weight. One of the biggest problems faced by the British wasn't just speed. It was escorting the bombers on the 590-mile journey from London to Germany. Unfortunately, the Spitfire at the time could only do about 450 miles before needing to turn back. So, American engineers came up with a new, heavy solution. They fitted massive internal fuel capacity tanks to the aircraft, placing them in the fuselage and wings. It bumped up the operational range to an unheard of 750 miles, while the long-range P-51D variant could reach up to 1,650 miles, more than enough for the journey to Germany and back. It broke the second rule of air combat, with most fighters considered short-range bodyguards or a close protection detail that only had limited escort abilities. But now, the Luftwaffe was stunned. British bombers were no longer just sitting ducks. So they were shipped off to Great Britain, and this is where British engineers broke the final rule of aerial combat. By April 1942, the first Allison-powered Mustangs arrived on British shores. Their main missions? To conduct low-altitude reconnaissance missions and engage in low-altitude combat, and they could go all the way. At least that's what the RAF hoped. Unfortunately, the real air war wasn't being fought at low altitude. The Germans were avoiding anti-aircraft fire, fighting much higher up in the sky, around 20,000 feet to be exact, and the Mustang's performance dropped significantly at such altitudes. The project seemed destined for a fate of being a good, but not great, fighter. Another footnote in the history of the war. Yet the British weren't going to let it go, and this is where the story takes a sharp turn, going from interesting anomaly to legendary. Impressed with the Mustang's airframe, the British began experimenting. They knew they had the best high-altitude engine in the world, known as the Rolls-Royce Merlin. In fact, this same engine was responsible for creating the legendary Supermarine Spitfire and Hurricane. But they added a different supercharger, a two-stage, two-speed system, aimed at giving it a massive boost at high altitude. After RAF pilot Ronald Harker flew the Mustang, he was the first to point out the shortcomings, suggesting to Rolls-Royce chief engineer Stanley Hooker that they should try mating the Merlin engine to the Mustang airframe. And in a moment that completely changed the war, a single P-51A was fitted with a Merlin 61 engine. As for the results, it blew away the entire Air Force, quite literally. The new aircraft, now designated P-51B and C, wasn't just a revelation. It shocked the Germans. The P-51B could now fly at 440 miles per hour at 30,000 feet. This broke the third and final rule of aerial combat. A fighter didn't just need to be a master at one thing. It could be a long-range escort, a high-altitude interceptor, and thanks to its new engine and sleek design, it was a deadly dogfighter. Essentially, the Mustang was 3 aircraft in one. So how did it win the war and change the balance of power in Europe? Before the Mustang found its way to the battlefield, bomber pilots had a code. They knew that once the escorts turned around, they were on their own. Their chances of survival plummeted as the Luftwaffe pounced on their defenseless machines. Yet, when the Mustang, especially the P-51B, came to the battlefield, a new rule was written. This time, the escorts stayed with the bombers all the way to their target and back. The effect was almost instantaneous, not only lifting the psychological state of bomber crews, but striking fear into the hearts of the Luftwaffe. No longer could they simply pick off bombers at will. They had to face the Mustangs, an aircraft that was faster, had more range, and just as deadly in dogfight combat. And it didn't just stop here. Some Mustang pilots like Don S. Gentile and Chuck Yeager used the unique characteristics of the Mustang to develop a new kind of combat. Instead of just flying alongside bomber squadrons and protecting them, they often broke formation. The Luftwaffe went from hunter to hunted, not only shooting them out of the sky, but even launching raids on airfields deep into the heart of Germany. But this was an aircraft that should never have existed. It broke every single rule set out before the war, doing things that even physics professors at the time might have thought to be impossible. As the British were near the end of the war, ready to fly the white flag, this revolutionary aircraft absolutely changed the rules of engagement, giving them a new lifeline that would see Adolf Hitler finally lose the war and leave thousands of Luftwaffe pilots refusing to partake in aerial combat. The P-51 broke every rule of air combat, and in doing so, it won the war, but not before facing one of its toughest adversaries yet, the Messerschmitt Bf 109. And if you'd like to find out how, check out this video next.